Somewhere over the skies of southwestern Iran, a $30 million American aircraft never made it home. No pilot was on board. No parachute was needed. One moment it was flying a routine surveillance loop, quietly watching roads, ports, and military movement thousands of feet below. The next, it was a fireball on the ground near the city of Avaz. This has now happened so many times in 2026 that the United States Air Force has reportedly lost roughly 30 MQ-9 Reaper drones since hostilities escalated, adding up to more than $1 billion in losses. Think about that number for a second. $1 billion in unmanned aircraft alone, with no pilots lost and no formal declaration of war. And every single time one of these machines goes down, the question gets louder. Is this just another data point in a long, grinding war? Or is this the moment the fragile calm between Washington and Tehran finally breaks for good? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why one downed drone can mean so much more than the price tag on the aircraft itself. To understand why a single drone shoot-down carries this much weight, you have to go back to how this entire war started. Because context is the difference between seeing a random headline and actually understanding the machine behind it. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran, an operation the Pentagon referred to internally as Epic Fury. The opening strikes killed Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei and set off a wave of retaliatory missiles and drones from Iran across the Middle East. Killing the single most powerful man in a country's political and religious hierarchy is not a surgical contained move. It is closer to knocking out the load-bearing wall of a building and hoping the rest stays standing. Iran did not stay quiet. It responded the way a wounded animal responds when it still has teeth, lashing out in every direction it could reach. This was not a limited skirmish between two militaries facing off in isolation. This was a full-blown regional war, and it pulled in countries that had almost nothing to do with the original dispute, simply because American forces used bases on their soil. In Kuwait alone, Iranian forces launched waves of ballistic missiles and drones, with dozens of American and Allied soldiers killed or wounded. In Qatar, Iranian strikes triggered incidents that included aircraft losses on both sides. Imagine living in a country that has no direct stake in a rivalry between two much larger powers, and suddenly missiles are falling near your airport and your power plants simply because a foreign airbase sits inside your borders. That is the reality Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia have been living through since February. This is the moment the whole region realized that a war between two countries can very quickly become everyone's war. The same way a fire started in one apartment can burn down an entire building if nobody puts it out fast enough. By early April, exhaustion started to set in. Wars are expensive in ways that go far beyond the battlefield. They drain fuel reserves, they drain government budgets, and they drain the patience of a public watching casualty numbers climb on the evening news. After more than 5 weeks of fighting, the United States and Iran agreed on April 7th and 8th to a ceasefire that also included Israel. For a moment, it looked like the worst was over. But peace in this conflict has never been a locked door. It has only ever been a pause button that either side can hit again whenever they choose. In the weeks that followed, the conflict shifted into a tense standoff over access to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping corridors on Earth. Here is why that specific stretch of water matters so much that entire wars end up circling back to it. The Strait of Hormuz is barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, yet a massive share of the world's traded oil physically has to pass through that gap to reach global markets. Picture the busiest highway on-ramp in the world, except instead of cars, it is oil tankers worth hundreds of millions of dollars each. And instead of a traffic jam, a blockage there can shake stock markets, spike gas prices at your local pump, and rattle economies thousands of miles away that have never even heard a single explosion from this war. That is why, when Iran threatens to close or restrict the strait, the entire planet pays attention, not just the two countries actually fighting. Then, on June 14th, mediators announced something that sounded genuinely promising. A memorandum of understanding designed to formally end the conflict within 60 days. For a brief window, it looked like there was finally a real roadmap out of this. Here's the problem, though. A memorandum is a promise written on paper. It is not a wall that physically stops missiles, and it relies entirely on both sides continuing to trust a document, and either side is legally bound to honor the moment they feel wronged. And in July, that trust cracked. The conflict resumed after Iran struck 3 commercial vessels that had bypassed its approved shipping route. Think of it like a fragile truce between two neighbors who agreed not to touch a shared fence until one side claims the other crossed it anyway. Except in this case, the fence is a shipping lane worth an enormous share of the global economy every single day it stays open. Now let's talk about the drones specifically, because this is where the story gets genuinely surprising and where a lot of assumptions about modern warfare start to fall apart. The MQ-9 Reaper is not some cheap, disposable toy. It is one of the most trusted intelligence and strike platforms the United States has, a workhorse built for exactly the kind of missions American commanders have relied on for 2 decades in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. In those environments, the Reaper flew almost unchallenged, the way a car cruises down an empty road with no traffic lights and no other drivers to worry about. But Iran is a fundamentally different kind of road. It has spent years building a layered air defense network, mixing long-range missile batteries with mobile, short-range systems that can hide, wait, and strike before a drone even knows it has been spotted. By April, reports were already tallying 24 destroyed Reapers, worth an estimated $720 million. By July, that number had climbed even further. Cost estimates for a single Reaper vary depending on the source and configuration, but generally sit somewhere between $30 and $150 million each. And whichever number you use, the total damage bill is now firmly in the hundreds of millions, possibly over $1 billion, once every loss is added up. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the annual budget of a small city, spent entirely on aircraft that carry no crew, gone in a matter of seconds each time Iranian radar locks on. One of the most striking moments in this entire drone campaign happened not inside Iran at all, but in Jordan, a country that is technically a close American partner, rather than a battlefield in this war. On the night of July 17th, Iranian ballistic missiles struck a drone hangar complex at Muwafaq Salti Air Base near Azraq, an attack that appeared to be the culmination of a months-long campaign specifically targeting America's Reaper fleet. 2 American service members were killed, with a 3rd reported missing. This detail matters more than it might first appear. It tells you Iran is not simply reacting to drones that happen to wander into its own airspace. It appears to be running a deliberate, sustained campaign to grind down a specific piece of American military capability, wherever in the region that capability happens to be parked. That is a very different kind of war than random skirmishes. It is closer to a targeted attrition strategy, the military equivalent of specifically hunting one type of vehicle on the road, rather than just reacting to whatever crosses your path. Just 2 days later, on July 19th, Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced it had shot down another American MQ-9 over the city of Avaz, using what it described as an advanced new air defense system. 2 hits in 2 days, on 2 different fronts, hundreds of miles apart. If you're the Pentagon, that pattern should worry you more than any single incident taken on its own, because it suggests coordination and capability, not luck. So where does that leave things right now, as of late July 2026? This is the part where the picture gets genuinely complicated, and where honesty matters more than drama, because the honest picture is messier than any single headline can capture. Since late June, at least 59 people have been killed and over 600 injured inside Iran, according to the country's health ministry, while the Pentagon has confirmed at least 4 American service members killed in the most recent wave of strikes. Those are not abstract statistics. They represent real families on both sides absorbing a war that keeps finding new ways to reignite just when it looks like it is cooling down. Diplomatically, the situation is just as tangled. Reports emerged that Iran had rejected a ceasefire proposal delivered through Iraqi mediation, though a U.S. official disputed that characterization as inaccurate, and Iraq's government called the story unfounded. Notice how even the basic facts of what happened in these negotiations are disputed by the people who were actually in the room. Nobody fully agrees on what took place behind closed doors, and that uncertainty itself is telling you something important about how fragile this entire diplomatic process really is. When even simple facts about a meeting cannot be agreed upon, imagine how hard it becomes to agree on something as consequential as who controls a strait that the global economy depends on. Then just in the last few days, something shifted again, and this next detail is genuinely worth paying attention to. Neither side reported carrying out attacks for 3 consecutive days, a rare respite after roughly 2 weeks of sustained bombardments that had raised fears of a slide back into all-out war. President Trump said the United States paused renewed strikes on Iran at the regime's own request, while warning that operations would resume if the 2 sides failed to reach a new ceasefire deal, though Iran's foreign ministry stated there are currently no active negotiations taking place. Picture 2 boxers who have both dropped their arms for a moment, gasping for air, neither one throwing a punch, but neither one leaving the ring either. That is roughly where things stand right now. And even during this quiet window, Saudi Arabia's defense ministry reported intercepting several drones aimed at oil facilities, launched by Iran-backed militias in Iraq. The pause is real. The danger has not gone anywhere. It has simply gone quiet. Before we go further, if this kind of grounded, source-checked breakdown of what is actually happening in this conflict is useful to you, consider subscribing, because we are tracking every twist of this story as it develops, and there is a lot more still unfolding. So why does one drone shoot-down matter enough to build an entire video around? Because it sits at the intersection of 3 things that rarely line up this clearly in modern warfare. First, It is a direct military cost, real hardware, real dollars, real capability permanently removed from the board. Second, it is a message, a form of communication without a single word spoken. Every time Iran downs one of these aircraft, it is telling Washington and telling the entire world watching that its air defense network is intact, functional, and far from broken, despite months of American and Israeli strikes aimed at degrading exactly that capability. Third, and maybe most importantly, it is a test of restraint, almost a controlled experiment in how far both sides can push without fully detonating the situation. A downed reconnaissance drone with no crew on board gives both militaries a face-saving way to escalate without immediately crossing the line into a fully declared war. Nobody has to explain a flag-draped coffin to a grieving family after a drone goes down. That makes unmanned aircraft almost uniquely useful as a pressure release valve, letting both sides signal strength and resolve without instantly forcing the other one's hand. But pressure valves do not work forever. Use one too many times, apply too much heat for too long, and eventually something breaks that was never designed to be repaired quietly. Every additional Reaper that goes down, every additional Iranian air defense system that proves it can find and hit an aircraft flying thousands of feet in the air, nudges this conflict a little closer to a point where a symbolic escalation stops being enough and someone reaches for something far more direct. What happens next genuinely depends on choices being made in rooms we cannot see into, in Tehran, in Washington, and in Baghdad, where mediators keep trying to thread a needle that both sides keep pulling apart from opposite ends. Some analysts believe the current lull is a genuine opening, a chance for exhausted militaries and battered economies on both sides to find an off-ramp before the next escalation becomes irreversible. Others argue that as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains a contested choke point and American drones keep flying reconnaissance routes near Iranian territory, this cycle of strike, pause, and strike again will simply keep repeating itself, drone by drone, until either side runs out of patience or runs out of aircraft to lose. Both views are being argued seriously right now by people with real access to this story, and honestly, either one could turn out to be right. That is not a cop-out. That is simply where the evidence currently stands. What we do know, with real confidence, is this. A war that many assumed would burn out within weeks has now stretched across 5 full months, survived 2 separate ceasefires, and outlasted at least one formal peace framework that was supposed to end it entirely. Each downed drone is a small chapter in that much larger story, but it is also a warning light flashing on the dashboard, telling us exactly how close the whole machine is running to its limits. Whether the next chapter is a negotiated exit or another round of bombardment may come down to decisions made in the next few days, not months. We will be watching the story closely and bringing you the next development the moment it happens. So if you want to stay ahead of where this goes, make sure you are subscribed, and we will see you in the next one.